Hey friends, this is Pop Culture Makes Me Jealous, where we discuss pop culture through the lens of race or gender, and sometimes both. And I'm your host, Julia Washington. And on today's show, my friend Meegan Morgan is back, and we are discussing Say Anything. When you join our Patreon community, you get access to all episodes, bonus content, invitations to our monthly happy hour, and a weekly drop-in hangout session that feels more like hanging out at a coffee shop. The cost is only $15 a month. When you join, we'll even give you a shout out in one of our episodes. When we hit 100 members, there may even be a book club involved too for us book nerds. Don't wait. Join us. Become a Pop Culture Club member today. Say Anything debuted on April 14th, 1989, and starred John Cusack, Ione Skye, and John Mahoney. This film was written and directed by Cameron Crowe, but before we dive into our discussion, let me get you reacquainted with my guest. Meegan Morgan is a yoga teacher, author, artist, and marketing maven who was born in Bermuda, raised in Canada, and who made California her home 8 years ago. Adopted as a baby, her Black and multiracial identity continues to inform all avenues of her life, from her artwork to her writing, and even her yoga teaching. Married for 25 years to her college sweetheart, Richard, and with 2 adult daughters and 2 dogs, Meegan's life as a reluctant and messy emerging empty nester is full, fabulous, and a constant work in progress. And friends who have been with us for a while, you'll remember that Meegan stopped by to discuss Nella Larsen's 1929 novel Passing and the 2021 film adaptation of the same name. She is my friend in real life, though we still have yet to meet in person, and I am so excited she is back. Welcome, Meegan.
Thank you so much. I couldn't resist a little giggle there because I feel like we have totally hung out in real life because we've hung out so much online, but that's going to happen this weekend, I think. So
I'm excited. Yes, I can't wait. I'm like, what's human connection?
We're so awkward now.
Yeah. What does that look like? You keep telling me you're tall, but how tall are you really?
Usually it's the first thing people say. Wow, you are so, and I'm not that tall. Like I feel we have friends, family who's taller.
Yeah.
I'm like, I've usually got boots or heels and a lot of hair that's up on top of my head. So I think it makes me look taller than I actually am.
And people can't, like, we don't know how to process tall women, apparently. Like, that's not a thing that we see represented in pop culture at all.
No, unless you're a model or like an actress. I feel like those, it's like expected you'll be, but again, not too tall because you don't want to be taller than the leading man.
Yeah, because heaven forbid.
That's what I love with all like the 5'10-ish big actors that there are. I love watching the camera angles they give them to make them look taller than their co-stars throughout the whole movie. It just absolutely kills me, and it's fine. We know they do that now.
I love those, like, this is how we make sure if this were real life, this is where the dude would be and this is where the girl would be standing next to each other.
Over the shoulder. It's always an over the shoulder look to make them look taller. And I'm like, why do we still do that? Why?
I don't know. We don't do that in theater. Like, it doesn't, like, I've had co-stars, if you will, who were like, because I'm 5'5", so like it's not hard to be taller than me. And even if I have to, I don't know. Anyway, let's move on. This is not why we are here today. We are here today to discuss Say Anything. So here we go. The 1989 Hollywood Reporter Review had this to say: as an intuitive and sympathetic look at teenagers on the verge of big decisions, Say Anything stakes out territory somewhere between John Hughes' adolescent fantasies and the corrosive satire in Heathers. This is Cameron Crowe's debut and was generally met with critic praise. The TV Guide, which I was like super thrilled that TV Guide popped up because I loved reading TV Guide when I was a kid and into high school and shortly into adulthood before it died. The TV Guide called this film a far cry from Hollywood teen romance. And later on in that Hollywood Reporter review, they said, quote, Cameron Crowe, who wrote and directed the film, develops an underlying ideas with a precise subtlety. This is not a melodrama about two kids who fall in love and a parent who gets in trouble with the IRS. It considers the story as if it were actually happening with all the uncertainties of real life, end quote. Not everyone had positive reviews of the film, though. Variety at the time was not charmed by Cameron Crowe's debut. Quote, Say Anything is a half-baked love story full of good intentions but uneven in the telling. Appealing tale of an undirected army brat proving himself worthy of the most exceptional girl in high school elicits a few laughs, plenty of smiles, and some genuine feeling. They even go on to say that Diane's character is flat and claims there is structural problems with the film. So I feel like, Meegan, we should really just start with, why do you love this movie?
Because me personally, I was the exact same age as these characters when this film came out. And I don't think I realized it at the time, because I feel like it came out in theaters and I probably saw it a year later.
Is that because you were in Canada and this is...
movies would generally get released on the same, but I don't know. I don't have a comparison of seeing movies in the US compared to Canada, but I feel like they do get released at the same time, just not as many theaters. But I would just I just recall seeing it on VHS. Like I remember putting a tape into so I feel like it was a year later, and it was like retrospect. I was like, oh, this was kind of my life in a way. Like watching it, I'd forgotten about so much of it. The car that he drives, I think it's a Chevy Impala.
Chevy Malibu.
Malibu. My high school boyfriend actually drove one of those. And I was like, what? Like I didn't get it at the time. Like I think I just saw it all later. But really, I think what I loved most of all about it was, and maybe it's still a thing now, I don't know, because I'm so far removed from high school, but it's like, oh, there's the jocks and there's the brains and there's the cheerleaders and there's the artsy people and there's like everybody was in their boxes and it was pretty well defined, but you didn't go outside those lines. And I kind of forgot, how that was. And I love that story of those boundaries and lines start to blur together, and that Diane and Lloyd get together and she kind of gives him a shot, and she never really, I don't know if she fully explains why she does that, but there's something she just trusts about it. And I feel like that's the nature of love. Like that's the nature of trust, when we're just like, I don't know what it is about this person or this situation, but I want to explore more about those and people who take that leap. That's kind of sometimes where all that magic happens, because we're always told, long-term divorce rates, and that's actually the whole other thing. In rewatching this before I get too off topic, I'm like, I actually really want to know why Diane's parents divorced, because they don't get into that. I feel like they never reveal that, and divorce was so common in the 80s that there was no need to do it, because it was just like, well, this is happening everywhere, so we don't have to get into it anymore. But a lot of people will say a marriage is doomed to fail if you don't have all this stuff in common. So like if you're both jocks or you're both braids, this is the recipe. You came from the same church, the same community, the same neighborhood. Those are all the things in your favor. And so I feel like with Lloyd and Diane, because they were, rebuffing all those things that people are like, you're doomed. And they probably had the best intentions. Yeah. But it's not necessarily what's best for the people.
I think people didn't give Lloyd enough credit because he is an army brat, because he's constantly having to grow and change and adapt, that maybe he could adapt.
Yeah. And her too. Like when you think about how much she had to adapt through her parents divorcing, and also his situation, like he's living with his sister whose husband left her, and he's like kind of co-parenting his nephew, like they really were coming from totally fragmented families, so they actually had that in common. That could have been explored more in the movie, like if Diane had met his nephew or they'd spent time together. I feel like that could have been another connection point.
It's interesting about you bringing up how they never explain why the parents are divorced. It didn't occur to me to think about it until like after the fact, when I was sort of debriefing in my brain about it, like because there's that scene with her mom where she's like, when
At the
the dad's
restaurant,
getting picked up from the IRS, and she's like, Mom, please just be, kind about daddy, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, I'm not, basically the mom was like, I'm not surprised your dad's getting busted by the IRS. That was the tone I took. So that's kind of the extent of what you get about the issues between the two of them, because Diane's telling Lloyd about it, but from her perspective as a child, not the being in the relationship with her parents. And it is interesting that she chose her dad over her mom. That I don't know if that happens a lot. I feel like a lot of the kids I knew whose parents were divorcing, they wanted to stay with mom.
I feel like that's not knowing a ton about family court. I feel like they do usually prioritize moms, and the things that I've heard about that. So yeah, it stood out to me at the time, and it still stands out to me now as something that's that's another thing that's a little off the beaten track of what you expect.
Yeah.
And now it just made me think about Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And I know we're not talking about this movie, but I feel like it was made around the
similar
same time.
Yeah. Ferris Bueller, I think, is 86.
Oh yeah. Okay. So a few years later, right? Because this was 1989. Yeah. And there's something about, like, with that, it was more like, I felt like those were totally unparented kids. And in this, they didn't say anything. Oh, and also that that's so so close to the beginning of the movie where her dad says, you can say anything to me.
That's right.
I was like, wait, no, I thought that was totally between her and Lloyd, but it was actually between her and her father.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, yeah, because they were super, super close. And I feel like that's also something I sure didn't see. Like, I had one friend growing up in the 80s who I'd say had maybe that kind of relationship with her dad, but also like her mom was around too. And so I feel like just to see a father and daughter that were that close, I had never seen anything like that on screen before. And so I liked it because of what it showed was possible.
Right. And we'll get into that in a little bit.
Oh.
High school love and the innocence of it all can feel so wholesome, even when you layer the complexity of their lives in, because their life experience is still a vacuum. Roger Ebert's review had this to say, quote, "The romance between Diane and Lloyd is intelligent and filled with that special curiosity that happens when two young people find each other not only attractive, but interesting, when they sense they might actually be able to learn something useful from the other person," end quote. This particular theme isn't new. Two people being from different worlds, parental concerns about being worthy, compatible, longevity, etc. These always come into play. So I want to talk a little bit about this because all too often, quote, "parents just don't understand" comes into play with high school stories. But in this one, it feels a little different to me. So do you think the story theme would work if the two main characters were from the same world?
Almost not at all. I kind of think it's because their worlds were so different, and that was constantly the tension. I was listening to another podcast. I'm going to tie this in, I swear. I was listening to another podcast, and somebody asked someone what their favorite show was, and they were like, Frasier.
Oh, I love Frasier.
I love Frasier too. And I was like, they asked the person, why do you love it? And they're like, because it's that tension. Like, there's that Daphne and Niles. Like, there's always just like, there's about this next thing to happen. And that it's friction. And it's like, it's funnier because of that existing friction. So you can sort of anticipate where it's going to go, but it's like, it's endlessly entertaining because it's still really funny how it plays out. And I think that's what happens when that there's a tension going on there. And also because I feel like Diane's character was expected to be so worldly and experienced and smart. Like, here she is, like, has this really progressive relationship with her dad, and she's got these scholarships, and she's the valedictorian, and she's the president of this and that club. So of course she's going to go far, right? There's this assumption that she has everything. Whereas with Lloyd, but every time you looked at him, he was just so genuine and heartfelt. And he's so good with little kids, and he wants to make it his mission to just like love Diane. I just don't think there's a person who could see him expressing that who's like, that's a really earnest life. Like, I think it's okay that he just wants to love Diane. So if he had been like the equal brain or whatever,
or even just social class, right? Like even just social class.
Yeah, that tension wouldn't be there. And I think the tension helps to like amplify their relationship, and like the stakes are higher. So it's more exciting as a story to see if they pass or fail, or fly or fall based on that tension.
Because I was thinking about too, like his parents didn't have to live in Germany. Like they could have just all been living in that apartment, right? Like he could still be lost even if his parents were living in the community with him, like living in the Seattle close proximity, what have you, because they never explain. Oh, PS, friends at home, Joan Cusack is also in this movie, his delightful sister, and that always makes me happy because I feel like she's always in one of his movies, and that makes me so happy.
Yes, I love that they're siblings in so many movies together. I would love to be fireside with them one time.
Right?
In a chat.
Right. But even in her situation, like, she's got this child, in like his father isn't in the picture. So clearly, like, even if Lloyd's parents weren't out of the country, they're still at a different level than like, because John Mahoney's, I assumed he was the business owner, like he owned the old folks home. Like I didn't think it was a part of like a bigger conglomerate. I thought he started I got the impression that he started the company, and that's it. So there's a difference between, being a business owner. Not that there's anything wrong with people joining the army and being in the armed services, like that's whatever. But in where I live, there's definitely, joining the military is definitely a way out of poverty for a lot of people in my community, because there's not a whole lot of opportunity here. And I'd be curious, like, a little bit more about like where they originated from, Lloyd and his family, because Seattle has a lot of opportunity. And I don't know if it did. I mean, I feel like it has always had a lot of opportunity comparatively to some other areas.
And on screen, there was a few scenes where I'm like, that is California. I know that in Seattle. And I meant to like dig into it a bit more. I almost want to now, because I'm like, there's a couple of scenes when he's packing to leave to go to the airport later. I don't want to spoil anything, but I don't know how much we talk about.
I mean, this movie is over 30 years old. Because it's okay. It's not our fault if they haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, the scene where he's packing with his sister to go to the airport, and they show this view out the window, and I'm like, that is Hollywood Hill. Like those are California hills. There's no way that is Seattle. But when they show the pan shots and like obviously that's Seattle. But even there's street scenes, they're driving around and like, I'm pretty sure that's San Francisco or LA. There's just, I don't know, but I want to look that up. But I feel like you're right. The access point to growing up is very different in those worlds too. Like you said, like going into the military, I almost feel like it's that divide that still exists with kids that go to 4-year colleges and those that go to community colleges, right? And I know in Canada, it's also very different than here, where I grew up. So if you went to like college, it was trade school. And if you went to university, it was a 4-year degree. And I know that's not necessarily the case here.
Right. Everything's college here.
Yeah, I know. We were so confused when we first moved here, because I'm just like, I always say university and people are like, it's college.
No, it's university. We have it wrong. We, as in us Americans, we should be calling it university.
Yeah. But yeah, I feel like it was a little bit of that, because she's like, oh, she won this scholarship, she's going to go overseas. And that's kind of the whole thing about the characters being from the same world. Even the position that Dianne was placed in, that was the thing that stood out to me the most about how this movie aged, and not in a bad way, but it calls out like the expectation. She's going to do so well, she's going to go international, she's going to have this great career, she's going to travel the world. But as a woman, she's like still expected to like be working and serving in the home that her dad, like there was still, they didn't show a whole lot about their home life, but I was like, is the expectation that she's still going to be a wife and mother and doing like domestically oriented things, while at the same time being like a Fulbright scholar or whatever it is.
Right.
And that's a double burden that I think is really placed on women. And then Lloyd coming in and saying, well, I just want to be here to take care of her and love her. And that's the role that usually we ask women to play in movies. So I think that was part of the tension of the story. Like, wait, who is this guy who's so good with little kids and is really good with old people, and he wants to take care of her? Nobody knew what to do with that. And even though they loved it and it made him really charming, it just throws everything, right? Like all the gender roles up into the air. And I love that. Like, I love seeing it now. Like, that aged so well.
Yeah. Do you think that this is why we love John Cusack so much? Because he played Lloyd? Because he really can't do anything wrong in my mind.
I worked with somebody who dated him very briefly, when he was filming a movie in Alberta, in Canada, in Calgary, Alberta. And I still remember her telling me this story, and I was like, what? And she's like, they'd met in this bar during the Calgary Stampede, and for whatever reason was like wanting to hang out with her, and he had like Marlboros, and and she said the whole night it was nonstop women, hi, like coming up over and over for autographs. And she was like, it does get really irritating after a bit, because she was like, I was interested in talking to him, and eventually they just had to like leave, and people were trailing them. And this is in Canada, pretty famously, people will leave you alone. So a lot of stars will go there, because even if people recognize you, they're kind of like, hey, that's so and so, it's not like mob media. But yeah, that's my only 6 degrees of separation story about him.
I love that. I think it'd be interesting. He seems like such a genuine guy. And when I was doing research for our episode, and I just, I can't think of a John Cusack movie I didn't enjoy, if I'm gonna be honest. He had a lot of really sweet things to say, just generally. Like, he's always very positive about his his coworkers, and he's just, and too, it says something when you constantly are willing to work with your sibling. I don't know if I could do
that. That part, it's weird, but it's quirky, like cute weird. I just love it. The scenes of them together, I was like, oh, she's so, they just look like babies. That she was so, as our friend Tammy was saying, she's so classically beautiful, but there's something about that 80s hair and makeup. This whole movie, actually, that's one of the things I loved about this movie so much, is I know they were wearing makeup and they had their hair done, but it's not like other 80s movies. I feel like other 80s movies, the hair was like so extreme, and had so much makeup on, and the clothes were like so, it's like an album cover, like it wasn't people being themselves. And in this one, I'm like, it's just them with their teeth and their like everything was just not Hollywood perfect.
Because weren't you the one saying like the nice thing about 80s movies is that everyone was still like, people weren't, how did you phrase it? Everyone was still kind of soft. Is that how you phrase? Because now you watch these teen movies and everyone's ripped, and you're just like, listen, nobody in high school has a body like that. Like, that is not an okay thing to be telling our children.
It's so, everything is just chiseled to perfection, and like their faces now too, you can tell like people in their teens and 20s have had surgery on their, and I know there's a lot of reasons for that. I don't want to throw shade on people for making choices in their acting careers, but it made me realize how like untouched, in a certain sense, those were, like, you just look the way you look, and if your teeth weren't perfect, or your skin wasn't absolutely perfect, or your body wasn't like a size 2, like people, there really was, I feel like, more body diversity than 2. And I was really afraid, I'm like, oh God, does something racist happen in this movie? And it doesn't. There's like, oh, there's some Black kids at the party. He's like, he has diverse kids in his like karate class. I was like, oh, okay. And I was all scared it was gonna come up as something awful. I'm like, it was just genuinely a really nice, I feel like it's actually a wholesome movie.
I agree. It definitely captured, I think, that post high school romantic summer, life is on the cusp of coming of age, life change situation in a way that feels true and like real, not forced, not contrived, just very much like, this is a realistic situation that could happen, And I thought it was sweet when somebody asked her at the party, or later on, I forget when the scene happened. Somebody asked her at the party, why Lloyd? And she's like, he made me laugh. And and she was just so happy that somebody was like willing to like crack a joke so she could chuckle. Like, that's adorable.
It really, there's something about being able to laugh with I feel like a partner who can always like see the brighter side of things.
Yeah.
Always scores a lot more points, right? Because you see everything differently because of the way they can see things.
Yeah.
It's not always about like what's right in front of your
Yeah.
face at plain face, literally face value, right? Like there might be a chink in their like aesthetic armor, but like you're gonna appreciate like the intelligence and the wit and all those things that they bring to the table that makes them so much more attractive.
Yes, I was just gonna say it totally makes them so much more attractive. Like, you can be a beautiful person on the outside, but if there's nothing inside, we've got a problem. And I need to have a conversation. That's actually a reoccurring theme in my dating life. My friend, a really good friend of mine, she is always like, you get bored. You need to find somebody like I'll start dating somebody and I'll tell them, fill in the details, and she'll be like, oh, that's nice. And then when things kind of fizzle out, she's like, yeah, I knew it would fizzle. And I'm like, what? So give me the analysis, please. And it always ends up being like something like you're gonna get bored is essentially the theme. So that, and I feel like I've run through every eligible bachelor in the test.
Oh, and there's the fashion thing. Can I tell you, I forgot about his like raincoat with his like high top shoes and his like baggy sweatpants with like I don't know, I was kind of like, that is kind of attractive. Like I feel like there was a whole look to that too. That was just like, it was kind of completely unput together, almost like maybe even thrift store finds or something. But I don't know, combined with his personality and like earnestness and eyes and humor and like, the ghetto blaster scene, like
he's just adorable. You know what I thought about when I was watching this? Because like, okay, 1989, that little boy looks like he'd be between the ages of like 3 and 5. Like, I could have totally played her daughter.
Yes. Where is he now?
I would love to know where he is now.
I think we need to look him up.
Because I'm like, did you keep out? He was so adorable with his little blonde mullet. So cute.
It's probably like, no, it's like Sean Astin or something.
That would be hilarious if it was. OMG. All right, I gotta pull up IMDb real quick. Stand by. Don't worry, it's my frequently used tabs.
Oh, nice. I believe it. You know what that reminded me of? His best, oh my gosh, what's her name? She's the one,
Corey.
Who's trying to get over Joe, and Joe
plays, keeps Lily Taylor is the actress's name. Yeah.
Yes, I love her, and I forgot how much I really love her. And also that trope of her and Joe, like that's very real.
Yeah.
In present day, like I feel like that happens to people over and over and over again.
I wrote 63 songs about Joe.
Right. But then he keeps coming around, and like I love that Lloyd stands up to him too, to say, can you just leave her alone already? Because she's written these 63 songs, so we don't want to hear about it anymore. And like he makes light of it, but at the same time, it's like we've all either been that person or we've all had that friend who's gone through that, and it's just torture. It's just torture to keep rebounding.
It really is. That actress, I forgot she was in it, and she's been in a ton of stuff. And then Eric Stoltz makes like a cameo, which I think one of the quotes I pulled talks about that. And then Pamela Adlon, she had a different last name in the credits in the movie, but I was like, why does that actress feel very familiar? She's done a ton of stuff. She's like voiced the King of the Hill, the little boy on King of the Hill. She's the voice of. She has her own show now on Better Things. She's done a lot of stuff with an actor that kind of hit a little bit of a issue in whatever. But she's actually like kind of famous, and I totally completely forgot she had this tiny minor role in this movie. And then when the credits rolled, I was like, Pamela. So I hit the IMDb and I was like, Pamela Adlon, like, duh. So that was exciting for me.
Yeah. There's people, actually, we had a discussion the other day partner about this, and we were saying that I'd love to be one of those Hollywood people, like you don't really know their name and you kind of know their face, but they've been in like 150 movies.
Yeah.
And they probably have had a really great life and made a really great living
Yeah.
doing what they love, but like no one's gonna run them down the street like with cameras. Like they can go to Costco, they can, live their life and do whatever and just be fine. I'm like, I feel like those actors don't get enough credit because they have steadily worked. They've probably worked a lot more than the big actors because they've always played these like kind of minor roles, but consistently. And so they're like formed in your psyche as, part of the American landscape, or at least the movie landscape.
Yeah.
But they've had normal lives.
It's like the dad in the new Bueller series. I was like, this guy feels familiar, but I couldn't tell you who he was. Look him up on IMDb. He has 154 screen credits.
That's what I'm saying.
He's like, 44 years old, 47 years old or something. And I was just like, well, I failed, but also good for you.
Nice. See, that's what it's all about. I think the aim is, for so many, it's like you have to be on the cover of People and maybe married to Tom Cruise, or like there's that whole you know what I mean, like the extremes of stardom, and I'm like, that probably wouldn't be that much fun.
No, I just recorded an episode about Amanda Bynes with some friends, and when I was doing research on her, she only had 25 screen credit, like actor credits, and I was like, that's it for the level of stardom that she became and still kind of is. Like, that's, you've only and it, two of them were, three of them were TV shows, so that's a couple years worth of work, but still the point is compared to, again, like some of these other actors and actresses that were just like, that person feels familiar, why? And we don't really know their name off the top of our heads, but then here's Amanda Bynes, who only had 25 screen credits.
Or like Gabrielle Union. We talked about her recently on an episode. She's like, can't even go to the drugstore to get like feminine products or whatever personal needs she may have, because it becomes like a front page story somewhere, or it means she's pregnant, or it means her marriage is split. Like it all means something. You can't just do the activities of normal everyday life. And I was like,
that's why those gossip things are really dangerous too, because it creates a whole level of, what does this mean? It's like, it means that I needed pads.
Right.
Hues by Jules offers custom artwork and original prints, specializing in watercolor, focusing on the human form and different shades of skin. If you're looking for that perfect gift for a birthday or have a special memory you'd like to commemorate, visit Hues by Jules on Instagram. That's Hues, Hues by Jules, Jules. When looking for retrospectives at the 30-year mark for Say Anything, there really wasn't a lot, which actually surprised me. The Hollywood Reporter threw their hat in, of course, because that's what they do. One thing I thought was beautiful in their interviewing of the cast was John Cusack's observation about Diane and Her Father. He said in the article, quote, "One of the very underrated parts of the film is just how great the story works as a father and daughter story," Cusack said. "Besides the love story with the two characters, I think the acting with John Mahoney and Ione is incredible and kind of underrated in a weird way, if you can have something that's underrated in a movie that's so beloved," he said. And this was in April of 2019. So this is almost exactly 30 years later. So I want to dive in a little bit more. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but I want to dive in a little bit more about the relationship between Diane and her father, because she full on tells them that they sleep together. And I thought, oh my God, would I ever? No, I still deny to this day that I've ever had sex in front of my parents.
I forgot about that scene and full on screech cackled in the room. And Richard came running out. He's like, what? I was like, I totally forgot about this scene. She's like, but I attacked him anyway. And the look on his face, everything. And I the same thing. I'm like, I don't know that I've ever had that honest of a conversation with any parental type. To make matters worse, I was raised by my biological grandparents. So guaranteed that kind of conversation was not going to reach that level of honesty ever. And but at the same time, I kind of think it's cool. I'm like, I love that she could say anything, like going back to that first time he says it in the movie, you can tell me anything. And I'm like, yeah, I bet you're regretting that now.
Yeah. The other thing that kind of stood out to me was how, so earlier in the movie, he's walking around, Lloyd's at the house having dinner with dad and associates and Dianne. And then they're talking about the jukebox and all the other things in the house. And he's like, oh yeah, the jukebox, blah, blah. And then somehow it gets brought up that he what he paid for the jukebox was like $9,000 or something like that. And then later when she's in the IRS office and he's like it's so casual and just kind of like out there, real how quick they throw like anything that's like less than 9,000, like or roughly $9,000. And I was like,
the
jukebox. And then, but she was smart. She's a smart girl. And she was like, no, you're not going to trick me into saying something about my dad. And that loyalty she had throughout pretty much the bulk of the movie until the very
end. Yeah, it was clear that the strength of their relationship was wanting to see her just keep standing up for her dad. And I think her knowing deep down that he wanted a really good life for her and wanted what was best for her. And even though ultimately what he did was wrong, that she kind of held on as long as she possibly could to the idea that he didn't do what everyone else was telling her that he did. So that specialness of the relationship, I think, helped contribute towards that. Like just believing in somebody that much is pretty special.
Yeah, I agree. Because it's not too often that we see in pop culture, because I felt like the relationship was semi-healthy in terms of some other ones that we've seen between parent children. He was just a normal guy who had expectations of his daughter, and she met those expectations and wanted to meet those expectations. There was a scene where she called home and when they were at a party and people were like, oh my God, you called home. Make sure you're crying when you go home.
Yeah, but that actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because he just had this, as long as you call me and tell me you're okay and check in, do what you want. She'd leave and be like, I'll see you in the morning.
Yeah.
With the expectation she was going to be gone all night. I don't think that's the norm in most teen parent households, because they're just like, you need to be back by 11 o'clock or whatever the curfew is. You certainly can't stay out all night. So the level of trust, that they kind of had, and again, exemplified by her coming out to her father when she's eventually intimate with Lloyd, too, was I feel like that's uncommon.
Yeah, I still had a curfew even after I graduated high school. So it's must be nice, Dianne. Must be nice.
No, there was some, now that I think back to it, I'm trying to think back to high school. There was kind of a bit of, and I went to 2 different high schools and lived in 3 different residential situations while I was in high school, and they were all very, very different. And so I feel like when I was with my grandparents, was super strict. You're going to the dance and it goes from 7 to 9, you'd be back by 9:15. It's literally the time it takes you to get home. That's when you need to be here. When I lived with my uncle, my cousins in another province, my uncle would be like, see you at 3, go have fun. And I'd be like, I don't and I'd come home at 1:30, I'm tired.
Yeah.
My friends all have to be home, so it's time to go to bed. And then when I was actually in residence in a boarding situation for my final year of high school, and they for sure had a curfew. You had to clock in at a certain time. It'd be, oh my God, it'd be 11:58, and you'd just see 50 girls running up to the door to try to get in, because if you were even a minute late, you get written up. So first year of college was nuts, right? Because now everybody can do whatever they want. And I feel those party scenes, when I think of college movies, that's a whole other discussion, I'm sure. You can have, and that's a big part of that, because people are so kids are so repressed at home, and there's so much they're not allowed to do because of their parents' fear of what they'll get up to, But all that stuff just happens in college anyway, because they just
Yeah.
go nuts in their
Yeah.
first year. It's like the write-off year.
Yeah, like in the party scene where they're a key master.
Key
Are you
master.
the key master? And everyone throws their keys in a bag. And I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
What a magical world the 80s were.
To have, I didn't remember that scene at all. I totally didn't remember that scene at all. And I loved how he checked on her.
Yeah.
Like she was like, see, he's just making sure I'm okay. Like he's not
And
crowding
not like,
her.
yeah.
Not creepy stalker, like who are you talking to?
Yeah. Stage 5 clinger situation. I've had one of those where you're just like, okay. You're cute, but not cute enough to be this clingy, bro. Like, come on. Yeah, they were sweet. Oh, they were so sweet.
I know. I just want to
This
watch that again.
Yeah. This doesn't help my unrealistic fantasies that my life could be just the most perfect, idyllic rom-com or romantic movie that isn't overtly grotesque in any way, shape, or form. Like, just keep reaffirming those ideals. Say anything. Go ahead.
Right. Oh,
It's okay. The other thing that I thought was interesting, and I mentioned this a little bit ago too, was how Diane's mom basically wasn't surprised about her dad being involved with the IRS, like the IRS coming for her dad. So again, it makes you wonder, like, what kind of person he is with his daughter, and is he being genuine? Because like other people are just, well, and ex-wives are a hard one to, convince that anyone's positive to, I guess, because that portrayal of like the exes hating each other is such a strong trope that it's hard to break away from that, I think, even in reality.
No, I totally agree.
We are supported by Maya, My Yoga Audio. Looking for a great read and a great listen? Then you want to read the short but powerful life and death memoir by Meegan Morgan called The End of Me. It's about Meegan's 3 brushes with death. And believe me when I say that it is meant to be a movie one day, friends. Also, check out Meegan's interviews with wellness professionals and creatives, as well as yoga and meditation classes on her podcast, Maya, My Yoga Audio. You can find the book and the podcast on her website, myyogaaudio.com. Tune in to My Yoga Audio wherever you listen to this podcast and buy the book directly from Meegan. The End of Me is also available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other major online book retailers. It can be really hard to not watch movies from a different decade with a current era lens, but at the same time, those of us old enough to have lived through the status quo of Hollywood filmmaking can have a complicated relationship with movies of the past. The boombox scene in the film is referenced often in rom-coms or other points of pop culture, and John Cusack's image holding the now relic of an item above his head with the look of earnest and love is ingrained in pop culture infamy. But with all the re-examinations going on, we must include Say Anything. So, and you already kind of touched on this, you already mentioned it earlier, but did this movie age well?
It did. I feel like it really did. And it goes back to those, like, even just was it today or yesterday, and a popular account that I follow on Instagram talked about like calling the radio station in the 1990s, like the early 90s, to call and request your favorite song, and then 2 hours later it comes on. Like, we had such a personal relationship with music. And I don't know about you, because I know we have a bit of an age gap, but like me and my boyfriends, we used to make each other mixtapes and like mail them. Like, if we weren't in the same town, like I'd get mixtapes from like my best friend who lived in England at the time, and so she'd send me all the new music that was happening in England, and then I'd make stuff because I lived close to the border with Detroit, so there'd be like all this really cool stuff in there, and I'd send it to my cousin who lived out west, because music always traveled, or how I've always learned it, music always traveled slower out west than from east. So she'd have this brand new stuff and she'd bring it to a party, and she'd be like the cool kid because she had this stuff that was from England and Detroit. Like, it was just that scene with the Ghetto Blaster encompassed so much of that, right? Because you could listen to the radio, you could play your own mixtape and make it so personal to connect with that person. And also I totally remembered the scene all wrong. Like in my head, that memory of him holding up the ghetto blaster was the end of the movie. I'm like, they're together forever, and that was the romantic moment, and blah blah blah. I'm like, that it's not even. It's like the 3/4 mark or something.
Yeah. It's his big gesture,
Yeah.
which I thought
Yeah.
was really sweet. I
Mm-hmm.
agree. I think it ages well. And I think a lot of that is because they are so focused on the core of Diane and Lloyd rather than the surrounding, right? Like, so
Mm-hmm.
because you're dealing with intrapersonal rather than, right? Intrapersonal,
Mm-hmm.
um, rather than the external, it really makes a difference in how a movie can age. And I think that if we were to drop this movie now with current stars, not, I don't think you'd have to change a thing about the script. Maybe because the other day I was like, well, yeah, like the main characters are white and the dad's white and the mom's white. It's also Seattle, which is still really white.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but like you mentioned, there were people at the party who were, there are people of color at the party, and um, I really do think that you could drop it in now with current celebrities that are 20 something playing high school kids,
Mm-hmm.
and it would still work.
You know what you make me think of now? It's like if they remade it in that time period in Detroit, like how different that music, what would the lead song be? Just
Yeah.
from growing up there. Like, yes, I knew In Your Eyes by Peter Gabriel like the back of my hand. But the other songs that were popular at that time, I
Yeah.
want to say like Cameo and yeah, like Prince and Michael
Mm-hmm.
Jackson. And when I think of the Black artists or artists of color that were more popular at that time, like what would that look like in that community?
Yeah.
And it's not a criticism of this movie. It just
No.
has my brain thinking of, besides House Party, like that's the only one I can think of that has kind of like a mostly black cast.
Yeah.
But again, very different kind of setting and genre. But I was like, what if say anything were, in a predominantly African American or Latino community
Mm-hmm.
or an Asian community, unlike, was it 16 Candles that aged so badly, like the
Yeah.
whole narrative with we
Long
must,
Dick Dong, and
yes,
yeah.
yeah, that's what I was holding my breath and say anything. I was like, did that happen? And I wiped it from my
Right.
memory, and I was so relieved that it didn't, because watching those other ones back, I'm like, oh, I love these movies, but this is so wrong.
Big old butt. Big old butt.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because we have a complicated relationship with them, because people, I would say, like, even people 5 years younger than me, we never really started that conversation of examining these movies until 2015-ish. So you've got a couple of generations now who grew up on those films where you're just like, listen, we didn't know it was icky until somebody said it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I was 30 something when I realized that,
Mm-hmm.
which is terrible.
It took watching it with my kids probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago. It was shortly after we moved to Sacramento, and we did like a whole John Hughes festival over a Christmas holiday season. And they were like, they were just like, I can't believe you watched this stuff. Like these were kids' movies in the 80s. And I'm like, well, they were like teen / adult movies, and they agreed, same thing, like there's parts of them that are really really good and they like the storylines, but they're just like, that's not okay and that's not okay. And I was like, very cool to have those conversations with my kids and for them to point it out. And I'm like, but I felt it too, like even at the time I was like, oh, ick. It's just like a ick, feeling that comes up, and now we know how to name it and point it out and say what was wrong. But like, yeah, back in that time it was
just normal.
The norm, it's not anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I do love your idea though about what would this movie look like in a different setting, because music is such a huge part of teenagehood. Teenhood.
Yeah.
Words are hard. And when you were talking about how your friends and you would send mixtapes to each other and all that stuff, there's like such a fine art that is lost. We would make, I was at the cusp of because I know CDs were introduced in the 80s and whatnot, but you still had to be fairly wealthy to afford a CD player and CDs, right?
Yep.
Like they really started coming into common practice in like, more in the 90s. But we would still make mixtapes for people. And it was not like, oh, I'm going to take it from the CD to put it on the mixtape. It was like, I'm going to wait for the song to come on the radio and work really hard to not get the DJ voice.
Yep. Press both buttons down to record
at the same time.
Yeah.
And then in our house, we would put the tape over the punched out part. So you could record over whatever that tape was if we couldn't buy more blank tapes. And, that's an art form that it's translated to an extent in streaming world, but it's not the same because, with streaming, you can put something on shuffle and the order changes for what, an artist, and Adele with her most recent album.
Did you hear about that?
Yeah, she made a kind of a stink to Spotify and was like, please don't let them shuffle. I'm very careful about how I curate this list. And I felt that because I was like, yeah, because when you make a playlist for somebody, and in her case, it's millions of people, but like that one-on-one, like I have a crush, I like you, or you're my best friend and I'm making a list specifically for you. You're very intentional about that order. And there's something super romantic about it. Not just romantic, like, ooh, I love you, but like the intimacy of a friendship too, to know that you are like being very diligent in what you're giving to them. I wish that level of artistry still existed.
It's so true. It's a very curated experience. Like that's like very formal language, but music has the power, and so do movies too, right? To bring you back to that moment. I think that brought me back to that moment and watching it. And I was just like, even the way that because it was film, like in 1989, this was still film. And I know it's been digitized. And actually that was the thing. It's on HBO. I think that's what I watched it on.
Yeah.
It looked so good.
Yeah.
There's so many 1980s films that I've watched and they're not redigitized. So it's just like stretched film and it looks terrible. And I was like, oh, and it's sort of like, this is just such poor quality. And it's not. So seeing something that's been like artfully redone to still capture like the colors and the film quality. I don't know. I don't have the brain to know how they do all those things, but I feel like this is the first 1980s film that I've seen where they've kind of done it justice, that you kind of feel like you've been transported to that time without it seeming like the lack of technology was so bad. It's a charm of technology more than anything else. The lighting, everything. It was just, also, it's a bit of a backtrack, but when Dianne was talking with the IRS and they were saying, oh, did you have nice things in your house, but not too nice, and like nothing over $10,000, $9,000 or whatever it was. And I almost feel like that's a playbook. It was the starting of a playbook of what they tell women to watch out for now, like Tinder swindlers and like, all these warning signs of a potentially predatory partner. And it was in her dad. And yet here was her dad telling her, don't trust Lloyd, but it was really her dad who was doing the untrustworthy behavior. And so just to me, I connect back all those things. I'm like, that was just sort of the beginning of those types of conversations happening. And anyway, maybe it marked a wave of what was to come next, but just to help women be more aware of what's going on around them, and never thinking that your own dad could be somebody pulling one over on you.
Right. Oh, that's a really great observation. I love that. Because again, we watch things so often and so regularly, especially the older things, that you kind of forget. And Molly, and I've brought this up a couple of times on this season, but Molly Ringwald really puts into perspective that era of high school 80s movies, because she calls it out in her New Yorker article. This didn't exist for us. We had after school specials that were cheesy and kind of dumb. And that was it. That's why this is so revolutionary. And then kids today don't realize that because they've always grown up with content specifically for them, like I think when I think back to just even my own childhood, like sure, we had TGI Friday on ABC 10, and then we had Saturday morning cartoons, but TGIF was still family friendly. It wasn't specifically for children, right? Like the Disney Channel now has like Disney Junior and like all these channels that are very specific content for that age group. And that just did not exist 40 years ago in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, in Canada, you're gonna laugh. So we did not have MTV at all, or like BET, any of that. We had a show called Video Hits. And this blonde woman named Samantha, I can't remember what her last name was, but I still remember her to this day. And she would like sit on this couch and be like, and next we're going to hear from Cyndi Lauper. And then they put on like Girls Just Want to Have Fun or whatever. And it was just, but it was so exciting. Like that's the only like curated after school kind of teen focused show. And then the original Degrassi series, actually, Degrassi Junior High. And that one. But other than that, and like you said, Saturday morning cartoons and stuff like that, there wasn't really that curated experience. There was the after school special, but you had to have special cable, which we didn't have. So if I babysat and happened to be at 4:00, then I'd see it. But nope, I didn't see most of those.
It's these kids today. They don't know how good they got it.
They got everything.
Everything. They got channels just for them. Though they don't have Total Request Live, so that just makes me sad for them because that shit was awesome. My best friend Abby, they had cable. They lived down the street. It's like, let's go to Abby's house, and we'd put it on, and it was just the greatest.
Oh, well, we did.
All the people. Just anyway.
I wonder if that's. See, I feel like Canada just bought. I don't want to speak out of turn because I don't know enough about it. But Much Music. So we didn't have MTV, but eventually we got Much Music, which was basically modeled after MTV. And then Toronto got Speaker's Corner, which I have heard the reviving, and it was literally like a phone booth looking thing on the corner of, I think it was King and Spadina, which is like this major intersection in Toronto. And you could go and just say whatever, like you could record up to like 10 minutes, and then this radio station and this TV station would just play excerpts of it like late at night. I know.
I see a lot of Lloyd Dobler and William Miller from Almost Famous, and I kind of love that. So that to me says that when Cameron Crowe writes about love, he has a very specific type of guy in mind. And so now it makes me wonder, is he like that guy? Because to see men portrayed as sweet and kind and caring and loving and not malicious or all about them is such a far cry from what we see traditionally in romance, in love stories and rom-coms, that it's kind of like, whoa, like here's a theme. Like as we went down the line of what Cameron Crowe had done, the William Millers and the Lloyd Doblers of the world are the exception. They're not the rule, but it should be the rule, I think.
Yeah, to help make it the norm. Like I like to think like Cameron Crowe was kind of advocating for that, kind of like a new way of thinking about masculinity. Maybe we're giving him more credit than is deserved, but the more we're talking about it and thinking about it and seeing the similarities in those characters, I'm like, was that a grown-up Lloyd Dobler? And now I want to go watch that again.
I love Almost Famous. It's so good. Oh,
I haven't seen it. It's just been years.
Oh, I watch it every year. Billy Crudup is so beautiful in that movie. I mean, physically, like his character's kind of trash, but
yes.
Like looking at him in a 70s retro style, it makes me happy. Sorry, Billy Crudup. I know that you're human. I should be more generous. Anyway, Meegan, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so happy to have you back. I love when you stop by, and I just love our conversations in general. Can you please remind our friends at home where they can find you if they want to keep up with you?
Couple of places. My main Instagram is Lovin' This Life, LUVINTHISLIFE. And I also host a podcast called My Yoga Audio, which Julia has been a guest on. So you can head over and listen to that episode and any of the others. And that's myyogaaudio.com, or on Instagram, it's my.yoga.audio.
Awesome. And we will put all the links in the show notes so you can easily find Meegan. Friends, until next time, thanks for tuning in, y'all.